Good morning. Good morning. Today is October 28, 2021. It is now 8:37 a.m. in the morning. Welcome to the Utah Board of Water Resources Board Briefing Meeting. My name is Blaine Ipson. I'm chairman of the board this year. Let's go around the table, and if you'll speak into your mics and introduce each board member, please.
Norman Johnson from the southeast area, Upper Colorado.
Jim Lemon, Lower Colorado.
Juliet Tennant, Salt Lake and Tooele.
Charles Holmgren, Bear River Basin.
Wayne Anderson, Utah, Wasatch, and Juab counties.
Randy Crozier, Duchesne, Daggett, from Uintah.
Kyle Stevens, Weber River Basin.
Okay, we have a full quorum of board members. All are present. Welcome this morning. And Director Candace, could you introduce staff and others that are here today, please?
Yeah, I'll start with online. We have Russell Hadley, and then in the room we have Todd Stonley, Shalane DiBernardi, Jaqueline Pacheco, Marisa Egbert, Joel Williams, Michael Sanchez, Tom, and Lindsay Russell. And we're grateful for Paul and Carmen and Tom Thompson in Salt Lake helping us with the AV. Oh, and Randy Staker and Marty is here too. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. As far as going through Chair's welcome, I wanted to just mention that yesterday most of the board members were able to participate in a tour of some of the water facilities in this area. Marisa helped line it up, and there were several others that were involved, and we appreciate that. Really good tour, saw some good facilities. To me, it was very nostalgic, if you will. I graduated from college in 1983 with a degree in civil engineering, and my first job out of college was with the Utah Division of Water Rights, and it was in the Price area office. And I lived over here in Price from 1983 until 1989, and every place that we went yesterday just brought back a flood of memories. Last night, I took advantage after the tour was done, and I went and saw the first apartment. My wife and I graduated from college, got married 2 days later, moved to Price 5 days later. So that was a whirlwind part of my life at that time. Went by and took pictures of our first apartment. It's still there. Went by and took pictures of the home that we bought and had for a few years. And just the memories just flooded by. The water memories, every place that we went yesterday, obviously in my 6 years down here I've been down a lot down in Norman's area too. We covered all of southeastern Utah. So for me, it was just like old homecoming. I've really enjoyed being here in Price and a rich heritage that is over here. So thanks again, Marisa, and to everyone who organized this. When it was decided to have it over here, I was excited. I was way excited. So the water year has started off, of course, October 1, and it's looking a lot better. I printed off the numbers on Tuesday before I left to come over early Tuesday morning, and we've been blessed so far in October. Let's just hope that it continues on that way. Just appreciate each of you and everything that you're doing today. Logistics for the meeting, there are mics, and if you have, when it's your turn to participate, if you will please turn your mic on and speak into your mic, identify yourself, that would be helpful. As far as Russell is online, and there may be other people coming online as well, if you'll identify yourself at that point too. As far as, let's go into the next item on our agenda, discussion of board agenda items. And before we do that, just a little reminder, in the regular board meeting, we'll have the applicant and staff come up to this table with these microphones right here. And if they can identify themselves, staff will first give the presentation. Then the applicant will have a chance to give some information. Then there will be some question and answers from the board. and then we'll ask Randy if there's been any public comments on the topic. And then there'll be a board discussion for any clarifications, and then there'll be a motion, second, and a vote on that. So that's the protocol that we'll go through in the actual board meeting. But for now, let's go through the agenda that is for the regular board meeting, which is scheduled to start at 10:30 this morning. And the first thing on the agenda that is there will be the approval of the minutes. So board members, we're not asking for a vote right now on the minutes, but did you have any observations or comments as you reviewed the minutes from our last meeting? I had a question on it myself, but Candace answered my question. The question was, as I went through the minutes, it jogged my memory of the Bear River Commissioner and the Upper Colorado, or the Colorado River alternate. And I asked Candace what the status of that is, and apparently, yeah, if you'll give an update on that.
Sure. We are working with the governor's office to get me named as the UCRC alternate. And so that's in process. I'm currently on the Colorado River Authority of Utah board by statute, so we don't have to do anything there. And then my understanding is the Bear River Commissioner seat is still being figured out, and so we'll likely have that motion, or ask the board to make that motion in December at the December meeting.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments or questions or observations on the minutes? Okay, let's go to the next item on the agenda. It will be under special items. It will be projects RE-061, RE-352, and RE-361, and that's Ephraim Irrigation Company. And Marisa is the project manager on that. That is in the area that I represent. Just from my observation, kind of what's going on here is Ephraim Irrigation Company has had a series of projects through the years to line their Trans Mountain Tunnel that goes from the Emery County side over to the Sanpete side. There are some Trans Mountain ditches over there, and those are fascinating ditches. If you ever want an interesting piece of history, look at the people in Sanpete County who settled before the people in Emery County did, and dug some ditches on the Emery County side, dug tunnels through a mountain, and moved some of that water over onto the Sanpete side. And so a fascinating bit of history there, but there was a big project. There's been several projects to reline that. In the course of the last one that we dealt with, that project was supposed to take 2 years to complete because of weather conditions and everything else. It actually took 4 years to complete. There were all kinds of cost overruns, well over $1 million in cost runs. The contractor filed a claim for those. Ephraim Irrigation Company and the other entities have been trying to resolve that. They've been asking Marisa, staff, myself for a while now if the board wouldn't just pay their legal fees, pay their settlement. They actually have got a settlement worked out, rather than being in excess of $1 million, about $400,000. And they've asked if we would be willing to do that. And looking and visiting with Shalane and everyone, we haven't had the posture of doing that. But what we have done to work with them is defer payments, future payments for a short time. So with that bit of background, Marisa, if you'll fill in the blanks.
There we go. Green is on. Yeah, and just to go back and clarify, we don't know exactly what the overruns were, but the contractor filed a claim for $1.4 million. And the company has also had to go back and still do more work because there were because of some of the difficulties and whatever the reasons may be, still had some more work to do. So they have some more engineering fees going on right now. They went to mediation. That didn't work. And then they continued to discuss with the contractor. And so they came up with this amount of $400,000 between the two that was agreed upon. And the other two projects that are on here, 061 and 361, Those were both pressurized systems that we funded to put in. And the reason they're involved in this is because those are the other two projects they're still making repayments on. And so that's where we could help them out with this delay. So what we would do is, what we're recommending is the board amend all three purchase agreements to state that the principal, it's a little long one, state that the principal payments will be deferred for 2021, 2022, and 2023, and will resume on March 1st, 2024, all three of them. Interest payments will be due on all three of them on March 1st of 2021, 2022, and 2023. Staff also recommends the board amend the purchase agreement for RE 361, so that's what we called the gobble field, the pressurized. They originally had 16 years to pay off. They asked if they could go to 20 years overall, but they've already made a couple payments. So staff also recommends the board amend the purchase agreement for RE 361 to state that the balance owed will be returned over approximately 18 years with annual payments of $62,500, and the interest rate will remain as contracted. So that brought that payment down for that project. I believe it was at 79. It was 79, so it brought it down to 62,500. Gave them a few more years to be able to pay that back. It's not just the construction on the tunnel, as everyone in this room knows. The drought has been hurtful in many places. Apparently, they did great over here with the reservoirs. They were talking about how great they did with Joe's Valley and such. But they really struggled in that area, and so they've had a hard time getting in the crop that they're used to getting in the first place. So that is what they requested, and it's what we recommend.
Thank you. Have you visited with Mike Larson, their president? Is he amenable and agreeable to these terms?
Yes, we talked quite a bit, some more, and they did send in a letter, because that's what we requested. You've got to send in a letter to start this process. And we had sat down with them prior to that, with Marty Bushman and Shalane and Joel and I. And so we have discussed this, and yes, of course, they'd probably like more. But yes, sounds like they feel like this will help them out to be able to have the cash they've got to take care of the settlement.
So you don't anticipate a surprise?
I don't anticipate a surprise. That being said, I do plan to check with them when they come in the door and check in with them just to make sure. But
because Mike has called me personally at least every 2 weeks, and I know he wants something completely different, and I just want the board to be aware that don't be surprised if he comes in and makes a different request than what the proposal is.
And we clarified many times that what they want should be in the letter, and does it match completely? It matches. I'm pretty sure we got pretty close. Yeah.
Close.
Okay, moving over.
No.
Okay.
You stay there.
Okay.
Yeah, I would just add one thing, he added some things in his letter. Just deferring payments, we're recommending just deferring principal and still requiring interest. The three projects combined, the interest total is just over $60,000 a year, so you'll still be receiving some money. So they aren't getting off scot-free. The principal total is about $154,000. So that, by doing it 3 years, that gives them $460,000, something like that, that they should be able to accumulate to pay off their settlement and some legal fees. There was also stuff in his letter regarding late fees and penalties and that sort of thing. But we've tried to make sure he understands that it's not required to ask for that, because if you agree to defer the payments, then their 2021 payment isn't late, just because they didn't make it in March. If you agree to that deferment, then technically the late fees are already waived. They don't exist. So.
And the other thing I might add, we don't know exactly, but the city of Ephraim was part of this whole project because they have a culinary line going through there, through the tunnel, which is the majority of their water, and they didn't want the tunnel to collapse either. And so when we first discussed, there was the discussion of how to handle the fact that there's these two entities. So we required there to be an agreement written up, whatever agreement they came up with between the company and the city as to how the city's going to participate in repayments. I believe it's 50-50. And we might need clarification. It's been a while. There's a lot of projects there. And so I know there are discussions with the city. I don't know what the final outcome of that was. So there should be some help there too.
Okay. Board members, any questions on this? Kyle?
Mr. Chairman, Kyle Stevens, and Shalane, maybe you answered the question that I had relative to the late fees being waived. So if I understood what you said correctly, and that is if we approve this today, their payment for 2021 wouldn't be late, and so there won't be any late fees. Because I had some concern relative to that based on some recent board action that we took with, I think it was Hooper Irrigation, where we did not waive late fees.
Right, and theirs was a series of years that had kind of built up, and so the board said, yeah, you've had more than just one problem.
Yeah, and I didn't know if this one, was more than 1 year or not, but based on what you said, then it's okay.
No, not recently. There were some in the past, but on these three projects and in the last few years, no. It's just this year's payment is technically late at this point. So there are late fees that show on their account, but if you agree to this deferral and we amend the contracts, the late fees go away.
Thank you.
Now, I suppose that what we'll hear from Mike today is, well, that's all good and well, but 400,000, 450,000, whatever, over 3 years, we got to pay that settlement this year, not a third each year. I'm assuming that we'll hear that version also.
I believe there was discussion, we spoke fairly recently. I believe it sounds like they're going to be able to take care of it. They've made an agreement with the contractor to make one payment now. And that may very well have changed at this point. But again, Ephraim City, I'm pretty sure there's going to be some immediate help there to help out with that.
Yes.
Tenant speaking. So the settlement, it sounds like took place outside of mediation. So do they have a written agreement around the settlement, or is it just?
Yeah.
Okay, it's just something I'd like to understand, because they could come, my concern would be, we're in this place again next year, and maybe the amount is a different amount, and, we're making some changes. So I guess we could ask them specifically, or go on the record, I guess.
So we will bring up another thing that another number may come up, but we've had the discussion with Marty as well and their attorney. And it hasn't been just the company in a vacuum. They've been working with their attorney. That there are additional fees out there because of attorney fees and such. Some other items were also brought up that additional work has been done, including some LiDAR, the engineering fees, and we reminded them, you still have a balance left. We can reimburse those. It took a little while to get that through. We have already reimbursed those. They sent the invoices in. Now, if there's still more, there could be still more engineering. But I have been working specifically with the engineering company and with them, because the engineering company gets all the invoices together and gets it. So I have been working with a couple different of the engineers that have been involved, plus Mike, saying any other invoices that are project related. So we've made it very clear that, we paid attorney fees back when it was requirements that we needed for this, we're not paying for those through this settlement. And so you might hear a number of 600,000, which we've heard. But I think the best thing is to try not to get lost in all of it.
Might lose you in a hurry.
So, but we've had a lot of these discussions, Shalane and I, but I'll be honest, Shalane really had to figure out this agreement, but we will both be here and neither one of us have a problem stepping in and helping try to clarify things. If there's a lot of discussion from here and then a lot of questions, it could get further and further. Trying to be careful.
Mr. Chairman, Randy Crozier, so I understand, right, so we're talking $400,000. Is half of that responsibility the cities and half of it's the irrigation companies? I just trying to understand.
Well, technically, okay, so that's what should happen. The problem is the contractor's contract is actually with the irrigation company.
Okay.
The irrigation company and city have an outside agreement, but the city wasn't actually a party to the contract with the contractor.
Okay.
So the contractor's claim is wholly against the irrigation company. So at this point in time, they are the ones solely responsible. Now, the city is supposed to carry some of that burden because of the agreement for the project. But we don't know what sort of commitment the city has made. Do we know if their attorney is planning to be here today?
I don't know for sure.
I will mention the attorney that is working with the irrigation company is the city's attorney. So he is involved with both parties. So hopefully there can be a reasonable resolution to all of this. We just thought, when we're looking at a settlement of 400,000 plus attorney's fees, we ultimately don't know what the irrigation company and city will each be wholly responsible for. But this gives them a little bit of time. They're still paying you interest. They're still, their balance won't change. They'll still ultimately owe you everything and have to come back to paying. This just gives them some time to get it all worked out, to get the contractor paid and be able to move forward.
So basically the city would be a shareholder or based with the company
Right.
or something. Yeah, I was just trying to understand how this was working and.
Yeah, and I mean, the settlement, the claim, it's all on the tunnel project. I mean, we're talking about amending all three agreements, but the city's involvement is only with the tunnel project, and it's because they also have a pipe for culinary that goes down that tunnel.
So is it hung in the ceiling or runs on the floor, do you know?
It's on the side. Is it on the ceiling? Okay, I couldn't remember if it was on the side. I think they actually put a second one
Yeah, they
in.
put a backup one.
Yeah, so they now have a backup for the city, so.
Well, I mean, that's pretty typical if you're going to run a line to hang it on the ceiling or whatnot so that you don't get any open channel flow issues interfering with your pipelines. I just was trying to understand just. It sounds like it's a can of worms that got opened.
It is.
Nobody's really determined which worm got out of the can and which one they're going to put back and which one they're going to sacrifice.
Right.
It kind of sounds like, so.
If I may, a few, for the irrigation company, there are shareholders that are paying repayments that are involved in all three of these projects. So they have got, just went blank. What's the word they pay? Assessments for all three projects. And again, the drought then hit. So they have struggled in that regard. The other thing I would like to add, a couple of us actually from the office were there that first season when construction started. There were railroad, the rail lines for the cart in the tunnel, perfectly available. There were discussions of a little, kind of engine locomotive to help. I don't think that happened until year 3. And the amount of debris they had to remove out of this, I mean, they knew how much debris, but I watched 4 men, especially at the end of the tunnel, because there was a little bit of an incline, 4 men trying to push that out. And I was kind of shaking my head. So there were some things happening that I must say are out of the control a little bit, because, can't tell the contractor how to do his job. It's that fine line. There was some unpreparedness, and it wasn't just the first couple years, not arriving as soon as they could. And snow is hard up there. Snow comes early, stays late. So it's a short season. That being said, it wasn't the smoothest of construction going on. So.
Well, I can sympathize somewhat with those challenges, but having done helicopter projects, I don't have a whole lot of sympathy. If you can drive to the site, you don't get a lot of sympathy out of it.
You mean not go in on horseback and have horses bringing in
the horseback is a picnic in the park. I mean, it's the fact that the day you fly, everything has to go, because you don't have an option on day 2 of bringing something else. And so, if you're doing a project, like my granddad always said, if you can't get the job done, just get out of the road. But, to me, that's sad that they weren't better prepared for what they were up against, because pre-planning can make a whole lot of difference. And, like I said, if you can drive a truck to it, you don't get much sympathy out of me. So anyway, I hope that they can get it resolved. It just appears that with what we're doing, in my mind, not knowing exactly what the total costs are, but if you've got a deferment of $450 and the city is possibly responsible for a couple $100,000, it appears to me that we're trying to work with them to allow them to be able to pay, and whether they do or don't have the money sitting from the first payment sitting there to be used for this, they're really only 2 years out. And the next one would be in March, is that one? So, I mean, in reality, you've got almost $300,000 that if, with their assessments, they should have sitting almost on site available. If you get the 200 or whatever from the city, that should allow them to pay their settlement. I guess that's my point.
And that was part of the discussion also,
Okay.
is you should have some money already sitting
Well,
there. And,
I appreciate I'm kind of hard-headed sometimes, but I just wanted to understand.
and I think the
I was-
reimbursement was another that we took care of here recently, was about $45,000.
That should have
Yeah,
helped
so there's
in
that as well.
manner. Okay.
And there may be some more that need to come in, but, they're not necessarily, they probably haven't paid them anyway at this point, because they're just barely getting them. But anyway, we'll continue to work with them, because they do have a balance. And that was part of the initial request. We have this balance. Can we use that for the settlement? And so, yeah. Okay, sorry,
No, I
been fun.
appreciate you trying to explain it so that I can understand. I just, I don't want to be as obstinate as I was the last meeting, I guess, but if necessary, it could still take place.
Any other questions on this project from board? This is my area, so I'll need somebody to make a motion on it. Jim? Okay. Okay, thank you. Let's move on to the next item. This one is project RE 427. It's Ashley Central Irrigation Company. It's a recommittal of funds. Randy, this is your area, and then Jaqueline, you've been working on this also as project manager. Randy and then Jaqueline?
Basically, they've just finagled and refinanced and re-optioned a dozen different times. Hopefully, this is the last one, Jaqueline. What are you hearing?
Is it on? No. Okay. So no, with this one, this is a recommittal of funds. They were pursuing, so they were The original project the board authorized and committed funds to was for a 2.4 mile canal. And they received a $900,000 Water Smart grant to cover that portion as they were pursuing funding for the entire canal. So they declined the Water Smart funding so they can fund the 9.6 mile project through NRCS grants. So this is a recommittal of funds because and it's also, we're expanding the scope of the project, but the board cost hasn't changed. So we would just keep the same recommendation that the board recommit 7.7% of the project cost up to $1 million, and it be purchased at 0% interest over 25 years with annual payments of approximately $40,000. So the original project, which was 2.4 miles, was $2.1 million, and this 9.6 mile project is approximately $13,057,000.
Thank you. Any questions from the board on this project? It's pretty straightforward. So Randy, you'll make a motion on this one then? Okay, thank you, Jaqueline.
Thank you.
Okay, next project is project RE440. It's Nibley Blacksmith Fourth Irrigation Company. It's a reauthorization and committal of funds. This is in Cache County. Charles, your area, and Russell Hadley's the project manager. So Russell, maybe you can unmute, but Charles, you go first, and then Russell.
Yeah, Russell and I met with Nibley Blacksmith Fork Irrigation a while back. Looks like it was authorized in May of 2020. Seems like we met earlier than that. But since this point, the president of the company has since died. And so I guess they've had some reorganization within the company. And then apparently they've, through them or their engineering company, they've found a way to find some help from other folks besides us. So the terms of the project are probably even going to make a better project and cost them less. So Russell?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, members of the board, the bids were through the roof. Project came in much higher, but they also got the Blacksmith Fork diversion is going to be taken care of by Trout Unlimited with partnership from Division of Wildlife Resources. So that took a couple of $100,000 out of the project, but even with that out of the project, it came in much higher at $1,380,000, and but they also have a Water Smart grant set up and a water optimization grant through Department of Agriculture and Food for $150,000. So their new amount they're asking the board for is $768,000. And because the lawn and garden, if you recall, there was this discussion about they wanted us to waive the requirement to have not allow watering from 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. The lawn and garden water portion of this is such a small percentage. We kind of decided we can kind of ignore that. They would appreciate that. They aren't really doing much to run that. They don't have anything to do with running the lawn and garden system. That's done through a homeowners association. So they don't really have any power over that. So we're going to kind of ignore the lawn and garden water portion and take this out of the revolving construction fund now, which means it would be at 0% interest, and just treat this like an agricultural project, which it pretty much is. So new terms would be 0% interest over 30 years, with annual payments of $25,600, which is actually higher than the original payments they were looking at, which were $22,500 originally. And that's staff's report.
Okay, my first question for you, Russell, is what surprises are in store when they show up today with a different proposal?
I think they would like the board to take them out to lunch in addition to the 0% in 30 years. I don't think they can ask for anything better than that. They were hoping to get the 30 years, and So that's about it. Haven't heard anything else that they think they're going to get out of this. No surprises.
We're going to hold you to that. Board members, any questions that you've got on this project for Russell or for Charles?
A question for Russell. Are they going to do this online or are they going to be in person? Do you know, Russell?
Yeah, they're going to do it virtually. They're going to be at Sunrise Engineering's office, and at least the secretary, Jay Tuddenham, will be there. So someone from the company will be there along with their engineering.
And I just had a question for the board. Just a clarification, since Russell's not here today. I am prepared to present if you would like an in-person presenter, but I am also happy to let Russell handle this project since he is joining virtually. It's whatever you would prefer as the board.
Board members? I personally would like, I'm fine with Russell presenting, but I like having you right there just in case.
Perfect.
Anybody got any different thoughts on it? Okay.
Mr. Chair, can I just follow up with a couple of questions? Thanks, Russell. I just want to, can you just help me wrap my mind around the magnitude of that lawn and garden water? So, it gives you a little bit of heartburn to exclude it, but if it's a really small portion, and I don't know, it's maybe really windy up there. I don't know the geography. I don't mind excluding it, but just, so if there's 181 homes versus 3,100 acres of ag land, is that the right ratio I should be thinking of, like in terms of the water consumption for those homes and garden, for the lawn and garden, or is the percent of the total that's lawn and gardens like smaller than? Do you see what I'm asking?
And yeah, if I could actually address that, Juliet. So if you notice, that's with the authorized amount of 442,000. That's why there was an interest rate of 0.15%, is because that 1% that we require for lawn and garden, when compared to the 0 we would offer for an ag out of the revolving, that's why it came to a 0.15%. And we just said, is it really worth the 0.15%?
Yeah. Okay. That helps me. I was trying to understand really because, I think the policy around that is a really good policy, and we want to stick to that as much as possible.
Well, and I think especially when you're thinking of, someone like Russell's other sponsors like Draper Irrigation Company, when they are the direct provider to the users. But in this case, the homeowners association is a shareholder in the company, so they're just treated like any other shareholder, and they control what goes to the users rather than the actual irrigation company. So it's a little bit different.
Yeah, okay, that makes sense.
And I think we just thought, in this case, 0.
Yeah, I would say, and it's still, it's sounding to me, I just want to make sure, it's still relatively small, even if even if the irrigation company had direct control over it.
Right.
I'm still hearing that the amounts, pretty small.
Pretty small.
Okay, thank you.
There's also another detail here. The irrigation company treats these lawn and garden connections and the homeowners association the exact same way they treat an agricultural user, such as all the shares that the homeowner association owns. They get all their shares released to them like every 10 days in the watering schedule, the same watering schedule the agricultural users have to follow. There's been talk about the homeowners association is going to put in a pond, but I really don't understand how the homeowners association is keeping the lawns green when they're only getting water every 10 days or so. And so that anyway, the company doesn't want to have to do anything to get involved with how they use the water. They just want to treat them the exact same way as they treat all their agricultural users. So as far as the company is concerned, they aren't treated any different than an agricultural user. So,
Russell, this is Randy. Do you know how many shares are owned by the particular subdivision?
Oh, I can look that up off the top of my head. I don't recall how their shares work, but If it's, no, I don't recall what it was.
Okay. I was just curious how it compared to acres. You know, I mean, we may be talking 60 acres or 90 acres, I don't know, based on lot sizes. I was just curious, you know, what percentage of the canal company shares they actually owned. Anyway, just, if you get that, it might be interesting if we just knew. That might help Juliet to fill.
I didn't know how to ask the question. Thank you.
No, you're great. I just, you know, based on shares, they should be able to tell us what the percentage ownership is compared to shares of ag water. So,
Yeah,
and it is ag water.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, and it's been a while since I've been there, but, and Russell probably has a better handle on this than I do, but I would guess that the residential area is somewhere around 50 acres or something like that. And like Russell was saying, the irrigation company is quite reticent to involve the water conservation program of not watering between 10 a.m. and 6 p.m. because they, as they explained it to us when we were doing the review of the on-ground review of the project, they were saying, well, if we shut off between 10 and 6, then the water just stays in the river and it puts us into a bigger deficit to operate the system. And then people will pull harder in that remaining period of time, and it defeats the purpose of helping the irrigation company. It may help the river, but it doesn't help the irrigation company to do that.
Well, and looking at the map, I'm assuming that if this canal is like a lot of other backyards it's became a kind of a feature, if you want to say, of those homes. And so that's probably why your bids came in so high, is because for that contractor to please those homeowners is,
yeah, but
he probably doubled his bid knowing the headache that he will deal with going through that group of homeowners.
Yeah, it's tight, and you know, the lawns are all manicured right over the top of the pipeline, and shrubbery and all kinds of good stuff.
And so when you know, if you're
Yeah, Russell does have a picture to show you. It's in the slideshow. So.
Well, and that makes it extremely difficult, and the price goes up substantially when you have to deal with that compared to laying out in an open field that's not as, so I assume that's why your bids came as high, and I'm disappointed that the engineers would have missed it that far. That's quite a ways.
Well, you know, everything's more expensive in 2021 than it was in 2020.
Well, I understand.
It's been just over a year since this was authorized, so
and
there's that too.
Times are crazy, I mean, but there's real challenges when you're going through those backyards and trying to do those things and please those homeowners and get out of there without lawsuits as a contractor, so.
Okay, any other questions on this item on the agenda? Okay, let's move on to the next one. Thank you, Russell. Next one is project RE452. It's Lindon City. It's a secondary meter grant. It's in Utah County. Wayne, that's your area. And Marisa's been working on this. So Wayne, if you want to start us off.
This is pretty simple, straightforward kind of a project. We would be involved to the tune of 42.9% of the cost. They've got a UWCD grant for 14%, and then they're going to cover the other 42.9%. So it's putting meters in the city. That's bottom line.
Yeah.
This is a happy one. This is really good. And hopefully there's no worms. So they're not only metering the homes. If you see in the cost estimate, there's many different sizes. of meters, and you see that 4-inch one, and 9 of those. So we're talking fields, you know, soccer fields, those kinds of things, institutional, school stuff, parks. So they're metering quite a bit. They do have 250 meters already installed on residences, and those are newer homes that they required to have that put in. And I will, and I'm sorry, the map's not in this. I'll have the map on the PowerPoint. There is an area that does about another 250 homes that is not even on the pressurized system, the secondary system. And I'll show you on the map, and you'll see why it's out so far west from the main area. And trying to, for those of you that kind of know the area, but I'll say, you know, when you start talking, is Kennecott? Yeah, the road, Kennecott Road, and out there, or Geneva, excuse me, Geneva Road, Geneva, and also the railroad. It got very expensive trying to do that. Now the 250 homes that do have the meters are on that same side. They put the line in. The development put that line in. And the city is already got that in their plans, and they're finalizing, you know, their secondary meter plans. But they now have a great option to add those homes to that, to the system now. But yeah, great project. I mean, they're anticipating at least they came up with a number of about 1,100 acre feet. That being said, you know, we've seen as much as 30+% in savings in other locations. And so it definitely could be more than that. Oh, this is the first of the state's water grants with the $2 million. I can't remember the House bill or the different names of them. So this is the first one. So we're pretty excited about that. We have talked with our PIOs and with them about having a press release. They're very excited about that. So this is pretty neat. They're excited about this. They don't mind being the poster child on this one. And yeah, and on this one, you'll note we'll start seeing the differences between, you know, it's not is it the ARPA? It's not the federal funds. This one is a 50% match on any other money that's coming in. So we subtracted out the Central Utah's $400,000 grant, went 50-50 on that. It's a little bit more than they were hoping 50-50 for the whole. They were hoping for 50-50 between them and Central and us. And so they initially started thinking of a little bit more, talk to their city council, but they feel comfortable with this. And, you know, they could also put in all the meters they can put in. If they struggle with their amount, they can slow down. So anyway, we're pretty excited about this.
Basically, for a large portion of their responsibility, aren't they installing them themselves?
Now you got, because I'm thinking of another project that I just had. I'll have to look that up. Let me see. Well, the cost estimate should, yeah. And because we had to ask them to get construction management because they were planning to do that. And the idea was, well, we still need that in the cost estimate if you want that to be part of the reimbursement. So I believe they are. I can't recall if they said they might have to contract out, but I know Salem City was doing that. They were doing their own installation. That's where I'm getting a little confused right now.
It seemed like these guys were going to do the same thing.
I'm going to trust you, Wayne. I'm going to trust you.
That's scary.
Thank you, Marisa and Wayne. Board members, any questions for Marisa or Wayne?
Could I just add one thing, Mr. Chair? Thanks, Candace Hausneger. Just wanted to add, so the legislature, as Marisa already described, appropriated $2 million per year ongoing for the board to administer these grants at a 50-50 cost share. So I just wanted to make sure we recognize it's ongoing. So it's pretty exciting.
Good. Thank you.
These are actually the guidelines you adopted in this last meeting.
Right.
So just to make sure that got on record, Shalane articulated that these are the guidelines we adopted at the last meeting.
Yeah, and if I may, being that this is the first one, trying to come up with a template of sorts for the report. We do have a financial feasibility in here, even though they're not paying anything back, because part of those guidelines were it talked about who needs it the most. And so as you see on this, and I shouldn't have overlooked this, according to the board's affordability, they can afford $58.6 a month per connection, residential connection. This puts them with their costs that they have to, actually, this is just their current, I didn't even put in the amount that they're having to come up with. This is just their current bills is already at 61, 62. So they're already past that. So definitely a need here for this.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions, board members? Okay, thank you, Marisa. Okay, the next item on the agenda is just noting that 2 new applications were received, and we're not taking any action on them today. The first is Project RE 453, Huntsville South Bench Canal Company. It's in Weber County, Kyle's area, and Ben Marett is the project manager. So we'll be hearing more about that at a later meeting. The second project, RE 454, West Cache Irrigation Company. That's in Cache County, Charles area. Russell Hadley will be the project manager from staff on that. We'll be hearing more about that project at a later date also. Moving down to the next item on the agenda, the Lake Powell, we'll be having a Lake Powell pipeline report from Joel, and that's in the agenda. Joel, you'll be going over that in the regular meeting. Anything that we need to know in here before that? Okay, thank you. Okay, the next item on the agenda that we'll be going over is a water banking report. We'll have an update from Emily Lewis, and it looks like Nathan's here as well, and we'll be having an update on that, and then possible approval of a contract of the water bank application and guidelines. Jaqueline is a staff member that's over that, and if you remember in our minutes, we asked them to have some of that information available for us for this meeting. So Jaqueline, Emily, Nathan, whoever, if you'd like to come on up and give us a rundown on that.
Project. Good morning, everyone. So we are continuing in our process to create the water banking application process. It's been a long journey, but what we submitted for your review today is kind of what we're seeing as, we submitted 3 different documents. One is the application form that is modeled after the forms that the board sees for their funding requests. Jaqueline has been very helpful in preparing that form. We had a really good, for all of these documents, just so you guys know is the process, and I included this in a letter, we do have a large stakeholder group of working members from the water community that have been involved in this water banking process now for almost 4 years. And so to prepare these documents, we've had a lot of discussion with division staff, with Jaqueline and Shalane and Nathan Bracken, who's kind of been sitting in a position of a stakeholder member for legal considerations. And then we held a meeting on, I think, December 7th or October 7th with about 40 of our working group members to actually go over these documents and get public comments from those who are members who might actually participate. And so we got a lot of really good feedback on the forms and kind of how to format it to both reflect the statutory process, but also make it fit with inside the divisions and the board's typical processes. So that, the form is one thing. We've got a couple comments that we can address on the form as well. We can address those in a second. The second document you see is the 5-step water banking application process, I believe. I don't know what order they're in your book.
And if I can interject right there, I did ask Emily and Jaqueline some questions, and one thing that I missed entirely in my initial review was that the documents we have in front of us, there's 2 different types of water banks. There's a statutory water bank and there's a contract water bank. The documents we have for today are contract water bank only.
Yeah, just contract.
And I missed that on my initial go through. So some of my questions were answered, just the differences between a contract water bank and a statutory.
Yeah, and Chairman Ipson had some good questions about, because the public meeting is so important, and we want to make sure that the public has, input on these, and that the board is not put in a position of approving something that hasn't been publicly vetted, because you are a public body. And the rub with the contract banks, it's not the rub, but the intent of the statute was to provide water users ultimate flexibility. And so the reason that there are two different forms of potential water banks under the statute is that statutory banks are kind of intended to act almost like a private water company that facilitates leasing between unknown individuals or a large group of people, kind of like how lease pools in an irrigation company work. It's a pool of water sitting there that people who are interested can come and rent. We are working on our statutory process in the Snyderville pilot project. We're not going to probably have information for you guys on that for another 6 months. We're slow going, but good going. The contract water bank is really what we think most of the activity for those water users who are interested in doing banking are going to use. And the statute is designed to have the applicant hold the public meeting. So the public meeting is not before the board. The board's actions are intended to be a completeness review of the application. So that's not letting, the purpose for designing the statute that way was the intent was not to put the board in a position of having to make a substantive judgment on how people have designed their leasing arrangement. And so the applicant holds the public meeting and then comes back to the board and says, hey, we've now met the statutory criteria, please approve it. One thing we have noted, and I'll put this, and I put it in my presentation for the actual board meeting, is one tweak we might want to make to that form, the actual application form, is there's not really an official approval denial box for the board. You got to get to the end to get to the beginning. And so if we do want to tweak the form, that's something that potentially we want to look at. And Nathan and I were just talking this morning and adding maybe just like an approved signature box at the end of the application that has like how each of the board members voted, or we've got some ideas and suggestions on that. And so that I think would probably close the loop on the board's hand on the application. One other thing that I wanted to mention for this body before the public meeting is that in drafting the statute, we ultimately wanted to create the most flexibility for the board. And so the statute does authorize the board to delegate actions to the division. And so even though the statute says the board shall deem the application complete, the board shall, publish notice. In our discussions with Shalane and Jaqueline, really we felt like those would be better delegated as division responsibilities. And so we've really had most of the work of the application at the division level, similar to how you do with your funding projects, and then ultimately resulting in working with the board member who's over that water banking process, the water banking geographic area, and then resulting in a division report and recommendation similar to your funding projects. So the goal is only to actually have to come before the board once at the approval stage, kind of like you do with your other applications. Otherwise, if the board were to shoulder the responsibilities that are all listed in the statute, we'd have to come before you 3 times, and that seems a tad excessive. Though if you want to, we're happy to have them come before you. So that's kind of what I'm hoping to talk about mostly today, is like the application process. We can also talk about the specifics of the price over water bank. Sounds like you guys had a really good discussion yesterday on the board tour, so maybe we can make that section a little bit smaller. But it is kind of a heavy process, laden process, and that's just how the statute ended up being. When you draft with 80 people with different interests, that's kind of how it results. But the form is supposed to be for the board. The 5-step application process is supposed to be kind of the public-facing document. We might want to make 1 or 2 tweaks to this one for clarity purposes if we want. But that was intended to be something to help interested applicants. Again, it's a work in progress if we want. And then we also have a 3rd document, which are kind of like internal board guidelines, which again, we're here to serve you. And so if we need to tweak or modify, we can.
Okay, Jaqueline, did you have something to add to that, or?
So I have the goal for today would be to see if the board would approve the guidelines and the application form, and if you guys are, if the board approves those, I have the motion written. It wasn't provided in your book, but I have the motion written in case you guys make that decision today.
And we are, on that note, likely we were hoping to submit our application, here in the next week or two, but realistically, we want the parties to feel really comfortable with things, and we have made a couple modifications in the last week to the contract, and so we want to give the parties some time to absorb it. So realistically, we're probably looking at kind of like a December-ish submittal to the board, or late November. And so, in terms of timing, we haven't really talked about what timing would look like to have, if we need to have the guidelines approved today, or if we can move it back, or if we could do a conditional approval with like the addition of a signature block, or that's your guys' processes.
Right, and I just wanted to clarify a couple of things as she was talking about the division being delegated some of the tasks. We would still, this application, if you've taken the time to look over the application, it's pretty thorough, and we still would require that the board member sign it before we take any action on it, the board member over the area. So that would, just like in a project that we would ask you to fund, that's the start, that's the starting step. And then the division would just, if you approve the guidelines, then the division will work with those guidelines to move the process forward, to do the tasks that need to be done that you don't necessarily need to be walking through the process. But then Jaqueline, especially in particular, this first contract bank that we're talking about here in the Price area, and we had mentioned on the tour yesterday that they might be ready to get together and sign their contract after your meeting today, and it sounds like we're not quite there yet.
But we have made fantastic progress in the last week. By me telling them they had to sign it, well, not asking and requesting nicely.
I'm impressed with the fact that you got 80 people to come together and even come up with anything.
Oh my gosh. We're, the cat herding is responsibility number one. But we actually have made really, really good progress in the last week. And I think we are very close to the contract. But again, everyone's got to go back to their people. They have to look at it. They have to come back. So we're going to give them a little extra time.
And I think even if they're not quite ready to sign their contract and submit an application, unless the board has changes they'd like to see in these documents, I think we would prefer that the board approve them as they're written, so that they're ready to go when the bank is.
So if I understand what you just said, Shalane, I'm looking at the contract water bank, 5-step water bank application process document, that 2-page one. Under number 3, number 2, they apply to the board. There's pre-application number 1, 2, apply to board, water resources, 3, division water resource application review. In there, it goes through, the division would mark it when they received it under A, B, that it's complete, C, mark the date that the water bank application was deemed complete by the board, D by the division, that says, and D within 30 days of being deemed complete. Of course, the statute, every one of those, it says board, not
Right.
division.
Yeah.
So if I understand what you're suggesting, it's that if we approved these guidelines, we would in effect be delegating the components that are in these guidelines to the division, as opposed to the board, which the statute specifically calls.
Well, and yeah, that was some discussion we had internally, that if you, and I don't know how many of you have actually taken the time to read the statute about board funding.
Several times.
The board is actually required to do a whole lot of stuff there too. But the statute that designates the division as basically a working authority of the board. We do the work and you approve it. We bring it to you and we say, and that's why every one of our motions says, staff recommends that you do this. We've done the work. we've gone through the processes. We know what your guidelines are, and so we try to stick within those. But staff recommends that the board do this, and then it's up to you to choose whether you're going to do that or not. And so just to clarify, that 5-step process in there, that's not an official document. That's not a board official document. That's just to help applicants along the process. The guidelines and the application are the only 2 official board documents that we would ask you to adopt. But if there's something you don't like in there, there's something you don't agree with or you still question, we'll work with you over the next month and fix it up so it's ready at the December meeting.
Marty, are you comfortable with this?
Yeah, I think as long as we can get the delegation, that would work, given that this is a preliminary matter to the final approval.
Yeah, and so if you guys, it's kind of hidden in the statute. It's 7331-106 is the delegation authority, and so it's in the original kind of like the first section of the statute that goes through a bunch of like just general provisions.
Nathan?
Oh yeah.
I just wanted to make one quick comment just to provide some context. Originally, these provisions, minus the final approval, were all written to be the division. But when we came to the statutory drafting process with the Office of Legislative Research, basically what it came down to is the way the code is structured, because the board is the entity that oversees the division, the code references pretty much everything the division does is actually the board. So this is fairly common with the rest of your statutory authority. And so we ended up doing this provision that Emily mentioned to do that. So we initially wanted it to say division, and that's how the earlier drafts were, but when it came to making it consistent with the rest of your statutes, we had to use the term board. So the intent has always been that the staff would do this legwork for you, and so I just wanted to provide a little bit of that context. So the intent really was never that the board would be doing this initial groundwork.
Yeah. Could I give you just a little bit of context? We actually, sorry, Ken.
Oh, just real quick on that, and thank you for clarifying the difference between the two. The one is the board guidelines. So in the board guidelines one, it doesn't mention the delegation of certain responsibilities, like of being able to mark it as complete. Does that have to be in there, I guess is my question.
If you want it to be. I mean, it's in the statute.
The statute is pretty clear already about what makes an application complete. So staff would know if it doesn't have everything that the statute said it has to have. I mean, the board can tell us it needs to have more than that, but the statute requirements are pretty clear, and it's not deemed complete unless it's all there.
Mr. Chair, does the board still need to like take even if it's on the guidelines, I wonder if the board needs to actually take take some sort of formal action to delegate? So the statute allows it, but do we have to approve a motion? And by the way, I'm totally comfortable with that, but just wondering as a matter of like public record or.
Marty Bushman, Utah Attorney General's office. Yes, the board's authority and it can delegate it, but you would have to take action to do that. It wouldn't be the division's, privilege just to assume authority the board has when it wanted to. So whether it's in the guidelines itself or whether the board just makes that delegation through an motion and approval to do these preliminary matters would be sufficient.
I think I will get to, wherever we're going to move on this, but I'm very comfortable with that. I would actually ask though, maybe and I don't think it has to be part of a motion, but if in these first applications, if as the division is undertaking or, taking on those roles for the board, if they would keep like the whole board in the loop on, so when we have an application for, loan or whatever, I don't necessarily know until it hits the, the board book, but in these first couple of applications, I don't want to slow down the process by having to have it come before the board every time, but just in the spirit of learning how the process works and seeing maybe where there are some gaps or areas for improvement, if staff could, assuming that we delegate, if staff could just provide maybe more communication than it normally would. I'd appreciate that.
We, and based on what you said, whoever's area the application's coming from, that board member is going to have to sign off on that before they start the action, so, yeah.
So, Mr. Chairman, as I'm looking at this, I almost see it as a little more similar to what we do now, as we would receive the contract water bank application would become before the board, and we would acknowledge it and assign it to staff to take care of it. But then I assume there ought to be a final legal agreement for signatures that would come back to the board for final approval. Am I misreading?
A legal agreement between the board and the applicant, or a legal agreement between the parties?
Between the parties and the board, there would be an agreement that comes back to us, I assume, wouldn't there?
Approve the application.
That's
all we approve is the application.
Yeah.
So we're no party to the final
Two phases
part.
to it. One, there's a review to make sure the application is complete and it satisfies the requirements of statute in terms of what needs to be included. That would be delegated to the division. And then the next approval after a public notice and comment would be a board approval, which would have to be an open meeting where you would actually vote to approve the application.
So basically you're looking at, to me, it's going to come to the board, you know, that we recognize that this one's been submitted and it's put on the docket, and then we'll have the approval.
Well, and where the initial is, it sounds to me like that's being proposed is just like a project in your area. Chairman? They turn in an app. Sorry about that. This is Blaine. To me, it appears like, Randy, that it's just like the same process that we do with a project in your area. They turn in a proposal. It comes to you as the board member for that area. You review it, you sign off on it, and then staff does their review on it, and then they bring it back for board action after that, and we vote on it as a board. It's just the same process, I think, from what I'm hearing, as what we go through right now with all the regular projects.
Yeah, that was our intent in going through this process, so that it's really similar to what the board currently does, so that it just makes it easier to streamline everything for this new.
So did the steps, the suggested guidelines and steps, have it going, once an application's received, have it going to a board member first to have him look at it? Is that in there? I missed that if it's in there.
Board guidelines?
It's on the application.
It's on the application.
Yeah.
Okay,
It
that's
shows
right.
it on the application.
Yeah, and I think there is a caveat where there's no like board applicant contract like you do with funding, solely because we're not distributing money, I think is our determination. And then the obligation of the applicant, once approved, is to just come back and report annually, and that's in the statute, is they have to do an annual report.
Okay.
But again, we want a process that works for you guys, and like if we need to make tweaks to do something different, like this is, I would rather go slow and do it right and have everybody feel comfortable and everybody understand than feel we need to rush on these two, you know?
Well, I guess my only point is it's nice to know that a project's coming up and we've been aware of it, and you'll usually have that'll take place in one meeting, or it can be set aside, but then it's usually finalized up in another meeting, and it just gives a board member a little bit of time to understand what's going on and then make the final.
Like this is Blaine, for today, in today's example, we've got on our agenda that we received 2 applications.
Right.
Yeah.
And so, hey, we received a water bank application. Now, you know, I think that's Randy's point is, why would it be possible to note, just like we did on today, application 453 and 454, new ones?
Right.
Hey, we received this, we'll be discussing at a later meeting.
Absolutely. And I think the only thing I would add in that instance is you may have seen from time to time, you don't necessarily know that there's a new application. You just see a new project based on when the application came in and how quickly the investigation was completed. You're all of a sudden presented with feasibility and go, did we know this was, the person in the area usually knows, but not necessarily everyone else. But in an instance like this, and it would be treated the same where the board member for the area signs it, then it comes to me. Just like the other project funding ones do, they come to me and then they're assigned to a staff member. I will just make a note that in the instance of water banks, when those applications come in, an email will go out to all of you that says, we have received. So whether it gets actually noticed on, you know, if the application isn't actually brought to you for approval at the next meeting, then we'll go ahead and include it in the next agenda that, hey, we got a new water bank application. But if we don't have that lead time and we're just bringing it to you for approval, I'll let you know. We received a water bank application, just so you're all aware. They've already started in the process, and we prepare to present it at the next meeting for approval. But we'll make sure we keep you all informed, especially since this is a new process. And so, yeah, we're happy to do that.
Mr. Chair. I mean, I think that sounds really great. I think as you know, once this, and I know these are pilots, but you know, assuming this gets up and running and it becomes a regular thing, I'm not sure that I would ask for that level. I mean, because that's a lot to keep track of. I mean, we're not asking for that on every project, but I would appreciate that on the initial ones.
Yeah, and I'm curious to see what the pace is of the review too, because it's also like, you know, the way we've designed it is that these are voluntary contracts amongst the parties. So it's, you know, like this is what they've agreed to. So all you're making sure is that their contract checks the boxes, that it includes the things we need to do to protect the parties and make sure the water is administered in a way that meets state engineer approvals, you know, essentially.
Yeah, and I would also mention, as you look at the application form in there, it's quite a bit more detailed than the project funding and requires a whole lot more than a project funding application, because there isn't going to be a ton of investigation. It's going to be reviewing the materials submitted along with the application, a copy of the contract, maps of the service area, things like that all have to be submitted along with an attorney sign off that everything was completed. And so really, by the time we get it, it should be a matter of looking over, checking boxes, and coming to you saying, staff recommends you approve the application.
So I have a couple questions looking to to the board meeting in a half hour, give or take. What motion do you have, Jaqueline, and how does that motion tie into at least a couple things we've discussed, one being modifying the form perhaps to have an approval rejection box, and the other being, do we need to specifically address delegating this, or do we just say that it's delegated like we have in that code with the other things? We've got 30 minutes to come up with what is it that you want us to approve, and can we do it with what's been talked about here today?
So the original motion that I had was staff recommends the board adopt the application and guidelines for contract water banks as written, but it seems like you would like us to make some changes before they're approved.
And so I think all we would ask in that instance then is that, well, and I guess it's up to you. You can, in the regular board meeting, designate specific changes you want, where, what form you'd like to see, and you can either adopt them as modified, or you can just say, go make the changes and bring them back to us in December, and we'll approve them then, which if you're more comfortable with that, we'll do that. Marty, Nathan, I don't know if one of you wants to address is a delegation motion required today? You're having that discussion now. I thought you were.
Yeah.
I don't want to answer that, non-attorney.
Yeah.
Marty Bushman again. The guidelines implicitly state that the division is going to do responsibilities in reviewing these applications for completeness that is actually delegated, or not delegated, but given to the board. One way to do the delegation maybe if you're going to approve those guidelines today, is just make sure in the record as you're speaking that is implicit within approving those guidelines will be a delegation of authority from the board for the division to accomplish what's outlined in the guidelines. You could do an independent motion, but, I think it would be covered as long as there's something, a discussion related to any kind of motion that adopts those guidelines, that it has a delegation within it. If, on the other hand, you're going to send these guidelines back, for further, additions, deletions, modifications, you could just also write in the document, if we have to go that, it's just a sentence saying the board delegates these responsibilities, and it would be more clear.
Yeah.
If you're inclined to do it today, approve those things as written or as partially modified. You just make sure the discussion recognizes the delegation. Is that?
Yeah, that helps. I don't know, board members, I'd like to get your thoughts and input on this, but me personally, we got this, last Thursday or Friday, copies of these, and I like to digest things. Takes me a little longer to digest things. I like to get into the nitty gritty on things. I would like a little more time and see what it is that we're actually doing on the application, where maybe we're going to have another box or two and things tweaked a little bit. I personally would like to wait until our December meeting and with the notation that I'd like to have at least a couple weeks, if possible, before the December meeting to get them in my hand and digest them.
And we're fine doing that. It's been a process, honestly, with so many hands in the pot with ideas and concepts. So, I'm happy to work with Jaqueline and kind of turn around. We've actually just today, and in the presentation at the public meeting, I can adapt it. We're just talking about looking at other municipal forms about how they look at an approval signature. And now that I think it was very helpful to have this date for the participating parties to put some fire under the discussion. But again, I think it's important to also remember the practical timeline. So we do want to try and run water through this bank in spring of 2022. So if we do want to resubmit the application forms, which I'm agnostic, I'm here to help shepherd the process and take the feedback that we received and give you kind of some tweaks. If we can approve them at the December 7th meeting, that would be really helpful. And then we will probably likely thereafter have a December 8th submittal because we're very close on the contract and we're very close on the application form itself. I think we're fine on the water bank side of things. We also have to remember that in addition to this, there's an ancillary and simultaneous water or bank change application process. And I think we as the group on the management side, we need to work with the parties to get the change application process moving, because we were hoping to maybe have the approval and then use that as the impetus, but that can also move in simultaneous and independent of the application, the board bank application process. The key element though is by January-ish, we really would like to have an approval so that we can move forward with moving ahead on any change application we have, because the change application can't be approved until the board application is approved. And it takes a little while to get those through the process.
Board members, thoughts?
Well, Mr. Chairman, this is Kyle Stevens. I have some of the same concerns that you've already expressed, but I also have a question relative to the process. Right now, the applications that we receive for the other program is generally it's a contact from a engineering firm to set up a meeting to review, or a member of staff and such to sign the application. Who would be the entity that we would be expected to receive that initial contact from in the case of these water bank applications?
So in these, I wouldn't be surprised if your actual call comes from an attorney.
Well, that's what I kind of expected.
But, the entity coming is a public entity. In this instance, I think the Provo River Water Improvement.
Price? No.
Price, sorry, not
Price
Provo.
River Watershed
Thank you.
Conservation District.
Okay, thank you.
There's a lot of acronyms.
Many parties involved. But yes, it would be, I would expect it's the actual signature of the application, but it could be their attorney.
And it's intended to kind of have the applicant be the contact with the board. You don't need to deal with 7 of the contracting parties. You just need to deal with the applicant.
And so along those lines, hearing the feedback today, I would suggest that we just remove the staff motion, the staff recommendation for a motion today, and not even ask you to adopt or approve anything. And I think what we would like is specific direction from you during the public meeting on what changes you would like to see, if there is specific wording you would like somewhere, something you would like added to either document, the guidelines or the application. Give that to us, and I would say within the next week, we would try to incorporate those into the documents and get them back out to all of you so that you could add additional comments, submit additional questions that we can vet out so that at least 2 weeks before that December 7th meeting, we have final documents for you to look over so that you would be comfortable adopting those in the December 7th meeting. Is everyone amenable to that?
And in the board presentation or in the public presentation, I did include an example of what the signature block could look like. And so we can look at that in between the two. And if you say that looks good, then that can be part of the public presentation.
So Shalene, if I understand right, when this application comes to either Kyle or whoever, whatever board member or myself, we will expect this to be filled out completely before we put a signature on it. You know, we won't be able to analyze and go through it, but we want it to be a complete application that is done and ready to go for review when it comes to that board member for signature. So
Well, and again, my understanding, Randy, is that we as board members are not determining that it's complete. We're just signing off saying, hey, here's an application. Division, please have your staff review it to determine that it is complete.
Right. That's not the completion approval right there. Your signature is just like on the projects where you're saying, yes, this looks good to me. And we as staff would then take that. And that's why before it comes to you, it's got to have that attorney's signature. It's got to have the applicant's signature. And there's a detailed list at the top of the application that says what that application has to include. Not just the application forms, but the other submittals they've got to turn in with it. So you sign off on it, say it looks okay to you, then it comes to me and staff looks at it to determine completeness. And that's when we'd prepare a report to bring to you and say, staff has reviewed and believes this is a complete and recommends that the board approve the application. If it's not complete, if we do our investigation and find it is not complete, we're going to work with them until it is. Because we don't want to bring a project to you and say, staff recommends the board deny this application.
Even though we did include a denial spot on the box.
To me, the way that it's filled out is that when I sign this as a board member, I've said all of these things are here complete, and so.
Well, and that's why I'm saying, you're saying it looks good to you, but it's not a full board approval.
You know, no, I understand that. I'm just saying that, you know, as an individual board member, I just want to feel comfortable in signing it because I'm not saying that I've reviewed every single thing here. So, you know, it's kind of implied it is.
You like the project, go for it.
Yeah.
Can I make a distinction? I mean, and Emily, correct me, there's 2 phases to this. One is you get the application, and the first review is just determine whether it checks all the boxes on the material that needs to be in it. What it includes everything. You're not making a substantive review on whether the application has merit, whether it otherwise complies with statute and the requirements. You're just looking at there's a whole list of application material that have to be included and information provided, and that's just to get it there. And I assume it's just to make sure that by the time we go to the board with the final approval, we're not going to be caught up on the technical application aspects. We're going to look at the substance of the application.
And right now, the signature block for the board member, it says, I have reviewed this application and forward it to staff of the Division of Water Resources to prepare a feasibility report. So you're not even attesting to that. You're just saying, this passes a sniff test. This is in my area. This isn't an application from, Provo, and I live in, Moab, and that, it seems like there is content and context in the application, and the 4 attachments are the 4 attachments. So it's really just like, okay, cool. We're going to start this process.
Well, I just want to make sure that there's a clear understanding that that's what we're doing, because we're not saying that we've reviewed and that everything's in place. It's just kind of the way it's put together. It implies that board member has gone through and recognized everything. So make it,
Okay, yeah, and so it's the same language generally in the other forms, so that's just kind of the starting of the process.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, just a quick comment, and I think with the added comments or amendments we've suggested today, it would be appropriate to have those, and I would be comfortable adopting it today. And I think as we have all gone through life, we have these experiences, and when we start doing the process, then we will start learning about our mistakes and our successes, and we'll have to amend this as we go on. I mean, it isn't going to be set in concrete today or in December.
Yeah, but I do think that the discussion over the last month and like couple weeks has been just really furtive and really, really good, because it is whole cloth. This is a new process for everybody, and I think it's been really good. The Brain Trust has had fantastic feedback, and I like the discussion. I like the direction it's been going. Okay.
Comments from board members? Any other board members? I gave my input. I'd like to delay it. Charles wants to do it today. What's the other board members?
Mr. Chair, I'm always, again, I'm like you, I like to think on things, maybe sometimes to the detriment. So I would just say I appreciate maybe some additional time for review, but that being said, I don't want it to be any sort of signal that we have some sort of concern. And also hearing, Emily, your feedback around this won't, if we delay it a month, that it shouldn't have an impact on actually getting water running through these things in the springtime. If I was hearing differently, I might push a little bit more to just get this stuff done, but.
I think we're okay. I do think though that like December really needs to be the time that we do this, which is fine. And I would rather have everyone be like, I don't want to look at this ever again.
Okay.
And then like, done. Would be my preference.
Okay. Yeah. That's helpful. Like I said, I mean, I would be fine to do it today, but always like be a little bit of extra time given that.
And even small things, like there's some things like now looking at them other people, I would tweak some language myself even, so I'm fine with that.
Well, and I think it'd be helpful to have printed what staff recommends, what that motion will be, so that we know that everything's included in it, including the delegation and all of these things, so that it's all spelled out in black and white. So if we ever got into a public review process, we could say, look, it was printed right here in this board packet. There was no question what the motion was going to be ahead of time. If you adopt it today, we don't have that in writing in the board packet today to back us up and defend and protect us. So I would feel more comfortable to have that printed in next board's packet and sent to us for approval, and we know what the motion is and how it's structured, and that way legal counsel, Marty, or whoever looks at it has got the time to tweak that, and so that we feel, so that it is all, the I's are dotted and the T's are crossed. I just leave it at that.
As far as Shalane mentioned, would like feedback from the board in the other meeting. I think the feedback, at least my feedback, is is I'd like something on the signature block in the application, approval, rejection, that type of thing, and the wording there. And then just, I don't know the exact wording, but it's this concern or thing we've talked about as far as making sure we're covered on the delegation, that type of thing, and work that out with Marty, the parties, whoever needs. So I don't even know exactly how to verbiage those or put them into words, but those are my two concerns. I don't know, board members, what other concerns would you like to see addressed?
I personally feel if it's laid out, it should. Sorry. My concern is just that it's laid out and we know what we're delegating, how we're doing it, Shalene, and so that we've got it all on the same page. And if there is a signature block for the board for that final approval, or if it's a separate page that gets done, and then to me, it's probably a separate page that just gets done and attached with the approval of the board.
We can do that and have it.
I don't think you
have it signed by the chairman after the board meeting that the application is approved. We can.
I don't think you need to put it into this. I think it needs to be a separate sheet that just is the final approval of the board that gets attached to it and goes with it. So,
and I think
that way you're not muddying.
Right. And I think what I've heard from you today then is for the December meeting, we will also, and hopefully we can do this as we send out the documents again for final review, is we'll prepare a summary report that includes the board's motion as like a cover to these documents.
Yeah.
So that's what we'll do for the December meeting.
Yeah, that's what would be helpful for me, Shalene, so thank you.
And looking at the document too, I think it'd be very, very easy to put like a simple sentence in that introduction paragraph that just says pursuant to 73-3-106, the board can delegate responsibilities to the division. Like it's just right there up front, done. Yeah. Okay. Great. Awesome.
Okay, well, that's been a good discussion. Appreciate that. Thank you. Next item on our agenda, that would be on our main agenda, would be adopting the schedule for the 2022 meetings. Was that in our packet? I probably missed it. Oh, there they are, right there. Yes, it is there. So look at that schedule. Board members, did any of you have any issues or concerns with that proposed schedule for the meetings for calendar year 2022? Yeah. Yeah. Okay, so we'll need a motion on that. So we'll just adapt if we need to, but we'll need a motion to adopt the schedule. Jim, you want to do that? Now, backing up to the water banking motion, there won't be any motions today then, is that correct? We'll have a discussion, we'll go through everything, and then no motions today. Okay. The last thing on our not annual meeting, but our board meeting, seems like annual, is the director, we'll have a director's report, and any sneak previews on that, Candace?
Yes. So I'll go over, just talk briefly about some of the water supply conditions on pretty much we've had a great start to the water year, similar to what you did today. And then talk about the water resources plan and where that's at. It's out for public comment. As you all know, we had a public open house. So I'll just give you a quick briefing on that. And that public comment period closes on November 15th. There were a bunch of interim meetings last week, so I'll give you a little kind of overview of what happened to that, as well as some of the ARPA funds and that plan going forward. That was presented by Brian Steed, Kim Shelley, and Commissioner Butters at the Natural Resource Ag and Environment Appropriations Subcommittee meeting last week. And then also talk a little bit about we're kind of investigating a Great Salt Lake Basin study and potentially working with the Bureau to issue an application for a basin study is what they call them. Just talk a little bit about that too. And If it's okay, wanted to introduce Michael Sanchez. I know you all know him. Michael, do you want to come up to the mic? So Michael Sanchez is our new public information officer, as you met him yesterday, and I was really grateful that he was able to pretty much his first day leave and go on a tour. So he has a strategic communications degree. And yeah, we're excited to have him as part of our team. Michael, did you want to say anything?
Yeah, it's been a great couple of days going on the tour with you guys and meeting everybody. Like Candace told me before, it's kind of going to be like drinking from a fire hose the first couple of days. But thanks to my travel mates, Joel and Marty, it's been like a little easier. They've been slowing the flow a little bit, so it's been a good time.
Lots of good pictures yesterday.
Yes. Yes. Yesterday at Millsite was really fun, and I loved the presentation before because that kind of gave me a idea of what has happened so far, and yeah, that was a great time.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Michael. And we won't do that in our regular board meeting, but just wanted to give him an opportunity. So that's pretty much what I had for you.
Okay, going that, well, other than a motion to adjourn at our meeting and on the other one, Julie, you want to do that?
I gave more than.
More than-
Or maybe not, I'm not sure. I kind of like to get out right now.
Okay, sorry about that. Back to our briefing meeting agenda then. We're 10 minutes away from when we're scheduled to start on the regular board meeting, but we've had a director's report, financial report. Joel, we'll just waive that this meeting, and the information's in there. If you have any questions, board members, on it, get with Joel directly on that. And with that,
I forgot, just two other reminders. Lindsay sent out an email on workplace harassment training, so make sure to update that if you haven't already. If you have any issues with that, let Lindsay know and she can help you. And then also, as you all know, but just as a reminder, we have our next board meeting on December 7th, which is a Tuesday. So that was a switch that we had to do.
that's in the morning, isn't it?
It is, and we do plan to have our board lunch after that.
Super. Okay. Any other last minute things, board members, before we?
Mr. Chairman, just to comment on what Director Hassenegger said about the harassment video or training. I did it like 3 times, and I don't know if Lindsay ever got it. I couldn't get it to ship off.
And now you have people working with my Mac button, so that's fine. If you just want to let me know.
I did it. I did it. I did it.
I don't take a screenshot. Really not that kind of a training, so I don't think you need to take it multiple times. If you take it once, you're set. Just let me know.
Okay.
And you log in with your Utah.gov username and password. If you need help with that, let me know. So I can get that information for you as well.
Thanks for your patience, Lindsay.
Okay, entertain a motion to close this meeting.
May I move to adjourn?
Juliet's made a motion. Do we have a second on it? Wayne second. Any discussion? Okay, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion adjourned.